Chapter 19. Finding Taylor. At first, I just stared at the blank screen, but I knew I had to do something. I had slept in, but that didn't mean I couldn't make it to Taylor's pod. Maybe I could do a bit of running. Heavens knew the Evernatch had built up our fitness while we're on the ship. Knowing Blossom and Sulin weren't coming back, and that Dave would be safe in the med box and then in the cave, I got ready to leave. Part of that was writing Dave a note and sticking it on the desk. I told him to stick around, that we'd be back to get him. I told him to stay safe and to use the communicator to talk to me when he woke up. And that reminded me of one more thing, the communicators. It was a bit of a risk, but Sulin and Blossom and I hadn't activated our communicators, and then they'd gone off to do whatever it was they'd left to do, and they'd been caught. I was hoping that when the Heritage discovered their communicators hadn't been linked, they'd think the same about mine and Dave's, and then they wouldn't try tracking us using ours. It was worth a try. Opening up the med box, I stuck my communicator next to Dave's and watched the two of them light up. After they were done talking to each other, I figured I'd be able to talk to Dave when he came to. I just hoped he didn't call me at a tricky time. I couldn't think of anything else I needed to do, so I topped up the supplies in my pack and made sure the rest of the cave was tidy. The last thing I did was risk a quick call to my computer guy, Sirva. I'm leaving now, I said, and climbed out of the cave. Knowing they could track me through the visor and hoping the Heritage couldn't do the same, I moved away from the opening. Pod close, seal him in, I said, and hoped it would let him out when he said he was ready. Checking the map, I moved quickly through the tangled bushes until I reached the edge of the thicket, and then I stopped. I would I could not forget that Blossom and Su Lin had been taken, and they'd been taken in broad daylight. I knew this because those two had been absolutely petrified of the dark, and the fact that the dark was the only time they thought the Heritage were about. Neither of them would have moved without the sun being up. I glanced at the chronometer in the visor. 11 o'clock. Taylor's pod was a good 20 kilometres away. I hadn't managed that much in a day before, but I could try, pack and all. First of all, I needed to stand. When I'd managed that, I tightened the straps on my pack. Muttering about it brought up a visual in a separate screen in the visor, one that showed me how to do it properly. I practiced a few other verbal search terms, and when I had the hang of looking stuff up on the fly, I picked a path that took me over the low hill at the back of Sulin's cave and down into another rugged valley. Taylor was a bit north of me, so I followed the bottom of the valley, half hoping the sides would become less steep and half dreading they'd turn into cliffs. The bottom of the valley was kind of flat, so I got to jog a bit and then alternated jogging with walking. By the time I got to the point where I had to leave the valley, I was almost relieved to find the slope was just the same as before. Habit made me check to make sure the visor cam was still recording, and I wondered briefly just how much memory it had to keep track of the data I was collecting. Because once we got rid of the heritage and got Sulin and Blossom back and rescued our Evernatch guardians, we were going to need it, right? You do get that, right? Right, you lizardy troublemakers? But I knew no one would answer the question, and I had stuff to do. I got moving. Once I hit the top of the hill, I hurried down the other side. There was nowhere that I could really run, and suddenly I was glad I wasn't trying. I saw and avoided several dense patches of cobwebs and stopped at the edge of a hole that opened up in the middle of a cluster of foot-high grass tussocks. Boy, was I glad I hadn't tried leaping over them in a hurry. I'd have fit into that gaping pit, pack and all, and I couldn't see the bottom or even imagine what might have made that hole its home. Remembering the centipede, I didn't try. I kept moving. Walking might take me longer, but it had saved me twice that I knew of, and maybe even more than that. Mid afternoon found me 2 valleys over, moving along another ridge on some kind of animal trail. At least, I thought it was an animal trail. I figured there weren't enough humans or Evernatch in the area to have walked this way often enough to have created a trail. Maybe there were herds of gazelle or kangaroos or something. That thought made me laugh at myself. Yeah, and maybe someone had dropped off a herd of sheep. Whatever. According to the map on the visor, Taylor's pod was hidden halfway up the side of the next gully over. I remembered the box canyon we'd walked down and hoped they hadn't picked the kind of gully that flooded suddenly. I guessed I'd see soon enough, but first I had to check for heritage. If I was lucky, the thought made me smile at myself. It was not a very nice smile. Yeah, sure. If I was lucky, and how lucky had that actually been so far? Sure, I'd escaped the missile with Dave and then the missile that blew up Blossom's pod, and we'd been able to save or rather, she'd saved herself. But anyway, I guess we'd even been lucky to find the cave and Sue Lin. Not so lucky to have her hit Dave, though, and definitely not lucky to have lost her and Blossom to the heritage this morning. Maybe lucky I hadn't been with them, though. I'd have been caught too. I'd probably have been too busy trying to keep them out of trouble or fending off snide remarks about what I'd said about Taylor to have noticed the heritage coming. I wondered where those redneck lizards had been hiding anyway. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to be keeping an eye on my own surroundings. Regardless of where they had been hiding when they'd picked up Blossom and Sue Lin, they hadn't been around when I'd left the cave, so Dave should be safe, which didn't mean I was. I found a gap between the bushes edging the trail and stepped carefully through them. I guess there was nothing like following a clearly defined animal trail to make you easy to see, so I guessed I wouldn't follow it anymore. Besides, the map said I'd have to leave the trail about now if I wanted to head toward Taylor's pod. Judging from the terrain around me, his computer lizard had done the same thing mine had, moved the pod away from its original crash site to somewhere a bit harder to find. I would have wondered if he'd lucked out on the sapphirite too, except I'd already been seeing blue flecks in the rocks and boulders I'd passed, so I knew he had. It made me wonder if I was doing a smart thing, taking everyone out of their safe places and tracking them halfway across the country until we reached our promised land, or in this case, my pod, given that Mitch's was clearly marked on the map. Mitch. It made my heart ache to think of him, and I couldn't help wishing I'd gone after him first. It helped that I knew he wouldn't have approved of that, and that he would approve of what I was doing now. We'd gotten to know each other pretty well on board the Evenat ship. Shaking away the memories, I found a sheltered spot under one of the trees and braced myself against a tree root in the trunk so I could take stock of my surroundings. The tree stood on a bit of a ledge, and I was contemplating if I wanted to slip over the edge to get to Taylor's pod faster, or if I wanted to work my way along the ledge until it sloped down to the next level. I also wanted to check out the lay of the land before I got any closer. No way did I want to walk into another heritage ambush. So you can imagine my surprise when the bushes below the ledge gave a single rustle and a figure emerged pointing something that looked like a bow and arrow at me. Don't move! I sat still and stared at him. I was sure it was a him, even if the voice was softer than you'd expect from a guy. And there was no way I was going to move with an arrow aimed at my middle. It might not kill me, but it would hurt like nothing else. The fact I didn't move seemed to confuse him, so I stared politely and waited. What are you doing here? He demanded. I'm looking for Taylor Cobb, I said. The Evenatch in the computer said we needed to band together and hide. The Evenatch are trying to kill us. Yeah, the redneck Evenatch are trying to kill us. Something about humans not being sentient and only good for food. The Evenatch in our computers are trying to keep us away from those guys. You seem to know a lot about it. That's because I was told I was the one who had to go find everyone, and you're the third last name on my list. Really? He looked past me as though expecting to see a whole bunch of other people. So, where are they then? Well, Blossom and Sue left me alone in a cave and got captured by the rednecks. Dave's in a med box because he surprised Sue and she hit him over the head with a lump of wood, and Alicia has been put in stasis because she's got tremors. Made a show of counting them off on my fingers. I found you, and now we only have to go get Mitch and Syed, rescue Sue and Blossom, blow the jammer that's stopping the distress call from getting to the protectors, and then go rescue the computer Evenatch who are watching over us. I looked at him expectantly and smiled brightly at the completely gobsmacked look on his face. So, are you? I asked. He looked confused. Am I what? Well, firstly, are you going to stop pointing that thing at me? Because, no offense, but you look a bit shocky right now and you're scaring me. Sorry. He blushed and lowered the bow, gently releasing the tension on the arrow. And secondly, I said, ignoring his interruption, are you Taylor Cobb? His eyes narrowed, but I kept very still. The bow did not go back to pointing at me. Who's asking? It was a fair question. Laurie Canavis, I said, and was more relieved than disappointed when he looked blank. I tried a smile. It's all right. I don't know you either. You don't? And I realized I'd been caught in a kind of lie. Well, I know your name, but that's about it. You're on my map. Now the boat did come back up again, and Taylor took a few steps back. I hurried on to explain. The map in my visor? You've got one too, right? He nodded, but didn't lower the bow. Couldn't say I blamed him, but I had to end this before the heritage got to us both. So, have you talked to the Evenatch in your computer? I asked. Yeah. He was being cautious rather than cagey, so I continued. And it's told you that we're being hunted, hasn't it? Moved your pod to a better hiding place and all that? Yeah. And he lowered the bow. We stared at each other until the quiet got to me. To be honest, it didn't take that long. I've been told I have to get us all together and then go to the Evenatch looking after us. I had decided I was going to try and use Evenatch as much as I could. Using lizards was kind of like using the sorts of slang people use to differentiate colour or race or religion, and I didn't want to be like that. Blossom and Sue Lynn had made me realize that we couldn't afford any of that, no matter who'd done what to who. I was still pretty mad at the Evenatch, and I really, really didn't agree with what they'd done to get our country to agree to join their federation or whatever it was. But it was done, and history wasn't going to change. Somewhere at the back of my head, a small voice said mankind wasn't going to change either. But I pushed it away. I had decided that this sample of mankind was going to change, or make a very good start at it. And they put you in charge, Taylor said. Yeah. He sighed and turned away. No offense, he said, but I don't want to be part of it. I stared at him and then remembered that he'd probably recognized the names of those who'd teased him, Sue Lynn and Blossom and David. Couldn't say I blamed him for not wanting to be a part of that, but I had to keep him safe. I decided to try a bit of toughness. Not sure that's up to you, I said. Pretty sure they put me in charge. I said it hard and pretty fast and kept my fingers crossed. I had only the slightest idea of what the girls had done, and it wasn't pretty. It had probably left a mark. You know, the kind you can't see, the kind that might never really go away. I didn't blame him for not wanting to be a part of us, but I couldn't allow it. Like I'd been told, we all had our parts to play. Looking at the bow, I was pretty sure he had one too, and we were going to need his skills. What about Sulin and Blossom? He asked, and I realized he wanted this conversation as over and done with as I did. Did you talk to them? He'd stopped and turned back to look at me. His eyes were full of hurt and the expectation that he was about to get hurt again, that I was about to hurt him, just like the others. Yeah, I said. I tore great big strips off them for making fun of you. Said they were no better than the heritage and that they'd better let you be what you wanted to be because we had bigger things to worry about. He was staring at me now. Bigger things to worry about? What do you mean by that? That we're going to have to unjam the distress signal for this colony and that we're going to have to keep each other alive until the protectors come. And that if you would rather be one of the girls, then that should be fine with the rest of us. I don't think I meant for it to come out quite that blunt. And I'm pretty sure he didn't appreciate it. But like I said, we didn't have a lot of time and it was a wasting. It's one of my major faults. I'm kind of goal oriented and very direct drive. My mum was always telling me that most people can't deal with that level of straightforwardness. Watching Taylor's mouth opening and shutting as his face went from red to white reminded me I was absolutely no good at this people thing. Honestly, why couldn't the lizards have put someone who could do the people thing in charge? Surely there was someone who was better at it than I was. What about, well, what about Mitch, for example? So you don't care? Taylor's voice brought me back to the present. Care about what? I asked, thinking there was a ton of stuff I cared about and wondering which one of them he was referring to. About me? Yeah, I do. I came to get you so you didn't get left behind or eaten, didn't I? No, I mean you don't you care about the way I was made a boy and I feel more like a girl? I looked at him. Honestly, people make the biggest fuss about the littlest things. So what if he thought he should be a girl and the universe had made his body different? We'd come up with ways of getting around that now. And there were all those studies that showed some people's brains really didn't match their bodies. And what business of mine was it anyway? Mum has told me I don't think like other people. But I can't see why I'm so different to anyone else. I mean, it's really no one's business how a person sees themselves. No one's got the right to make a person feel bad because they're a bit different to anyone else, right? I mean, people don't like me because I'm different, but that's different. Just because they don't like me doesn't give me the right to not like someone else. That's not fair. They should just be nice to each other for God's sake. So, do you? Taylor asked, and I realized I'd been off in La La Land again. I looked at him. I had to find a way to tell him what I was thinking without beating him between the eyes with a brick. This I wasn't good at. Look, I said, you know who you are better than anyone else, right? He nodded, once, sort of jerkily, his eyes as wide as one could be. So, no one has the right to tell you how to feel about the way you're made, or the way you think you should be. And people need to just get over themselves and look after each other, no matter how different they are, okay? Again, he nodded that jerky nod. He swallowed a couple of times too, and then he held out a hand. Let me help you down from there, he said. Boy, was I glad that was over.